identified but still unsolved who killed Wilma Nissen in 1978? Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know where you are watching from in the comment. The wind cut sharp through the flat Carolina fields. It was October 1978, the kind of autumn morning when the air smells of cold earth and damp grass. A farmer in rural Lancaster County stepped out to check his fences. His boots sank slightly into the dew-soaked ground. The sun was still low. The fog hung heavy over the field. He didn't expect to see anything unusual. Just fence posts, just cows, just another day. But halfway across his land, something stopped him. At first, it looked like a bundle of rags, torn, faded, lying in the grass beside the dirt road. He stepped closer. His chest tightened. It wasn't rags. It was a woman. She was lying face down. Her body was partly hidden by weeds and brush. Her hair, long, blonde, tangled, spilled across the dirt. The clothes she wore were torn, weathered by rain and wind. The farmer froze. This wasn't an accident victim. Something about the scene was wrong. Very wrong. He backed away, hurrying to his truck. The drive to the sheriff's office felt longer than it should. He told them everything. Within an hour, deputies arrived. Blue lights flashed against the pale morning fog. The sheriff's men moved slowly, scanning the ground for clues. They marked the spot with yellow tape. No purse, no wallet, no identification. Just the body of a young woman who seemed to have been left here, discarded. They estimated she was in her 20s. She was small-framed, maybe 5'3". Her skin was pale from death. The medical examiner believed she had been dead for days, maybe longer. But there was one thing certain. She hadn't died here. The ground beneath her was dry. Her body bore marks of having been dragged or carried. Someone had put her here deliberately, and they wanted her to stay unknown. News traveled fast. In small-town South Carolina, murder wasn't common. And a mystery victim? That was even worse. People whispered in grocery stores and gas stations. Who was she? Where did she come from? Was her killer still out there? The sheriff's department had no answers. They released a basic description to the press. Blonde hair, blue eyes, no tattoos, no scars. She wore a blue blouse and jeans. Her shoes were missing. It was as if she had been erased from the world. Detectives worked through missing persons reports from across the state. They called other counties. They reached out to neighboring states, but no one matched her. The 1970s had no digital databases, no quick fingerprint scans. Everything had to be done by hand, slowly, painstakingly, and each day that passed, the trail grew colder. The autopsy revealed the cause of death, strangulation. It was brutal, deliberate. There were no defensive wounds on her hands or arms, suggesting she may have been restrained or caught completely off guard. She had been dead for at least several days before being found. Weather had already begun to affect the body, but there was something else. The medical examiner found signs of past injuries. Old bruises, healed fractures, told a grim story. This woman had lived through violence before. Without a name, investigators had almost nothing to work with. No family to interview, no friends to question, no place to begin tracking her last steps. All they had was a lifeless young woman, a murder scene that wasn't the real murder scene, and a handful of personal details that could fit hundreds of people. She was given a name by police, Lancaster County Jane Doe. It was a placeholder, a way to keep her file in the system. The first tip came from a truck driver who thought he'd seen her hitchhiking along Highway 9 the week before. She was alone. She didn't carry a bag. But hitchhikers were common then, and by the time police checked the area, she was gone. Another lead came from a woman who swore she had seen her in a diner 2 towns over. She remembered because the girl had been quiet, almost nervous, and left without finishing her food. But no one else remembered her. Weeks passed. The tips slowed, and the case began to fade from the front page. With no identity, the county could not return her to family. They buried her in a simple grave in Lancaster County, marked only as Jane Doe. No flowers, No mourners except for a few deputies who felt someone should be there. The sheriff made a quiet promise that day. "We'll find out who you are." But he didn't know it would take decades. It's important to remember, this was 1978. There were no national DNA databases, no instant data sharing between states, no cell phones to trace, no surveillance cameras to check. The investigation moved at the speed of paperwork. And if a lead died, it stayed dead. The killer knew that, and he was counting on it. The country had bigger headlines that fall. Serial killers in California, political scandals in Washington. Lancaster County's Jane Doe became a local ghost, known to a few, forgotten by most. The file sat in the sheriff's office, slowly gathering dust. Her photograph, a black and white image from the autopsy, sat clipped to the inside cover. It was the only picture they had of her. Detectives retired. Others took their place. Every few years, someone would open the file and try again. But it always ended the same. No name, no arrest. And all the while, somewhere out there, her killer lived his life. He may have changed his name, moved to another state, started a family. He may have thought the past was buried forever. Nearly 30 years later, science caught up with the case. DNA technology had advanced. Old evidence could be tested. A detective, new to the department, but determined, decided to have her remains exhumed. It was a long shot, but sometimes a long shot is all you have. Her body was carefully taken from the grave. Samples were sent to a lab. The results? A genetic profile. For the first time in history, Lancaster County Jane Doe had a chance at getting her name back. But naming her would only be the beginning, because once her identity was revealed, the real hunt would begin. And her killer? He had been hiding in plain sight. The autumn wind swept across the Carolinas. It was late September 1978. Wilma Nissen was alive, but she was also a woman living on the edge. She was only 29, young, vibrant, but carrying a weight on her shoulders. She had left home years before, chasing freedom, chasing escape. But life outside the safety of her hometown was cruel. Wilma was born in Ohio, a small-town girl, a place where everyone knew everyone, a place where church bells rang on Sundays and neighbors waved from their porches. But by her teens, she had drifted away. The reasons? Family tension, broken relationships, a hunger for something bigger. She moved often. Ohio, Florida, South Carolina, never staying too long in one place. She made friends quickly, and just as quickly, she left them behind. Her path was unpredictable and dangerous. By the late 1970s, Wilma was deep in the street life. Bars, cheap motels, people who lived in the shadows, truck stops that stayed open all night. Police believe she was working as a sex worker. The streets were her office. And in those streets, danger was constant. Men who smiled one second and turned violent the next. Other women who vanished without a trace. Drugs, alcohol, and people who had nothing to lose. She told some friends she feared for her safety. She knew she had enemies, but she didn't always know their names. The final confirmed sighting of Wilma came in late September 1978. She was seen in Charlotte, North Carolina, hanging around a bar off Independence Boulevard. She was with a man no one could later identify. Witnesses described him as white, mid-30s, tall, dark hair, dressed better than most men in that bar. She told someone she was heading toward Myrtle Beach, said she had a ride lined up, and that she'd be back in a few days. But she never came back. When Wilma didn't return, the few friends she had were not surprised. People disappeared all the time in their world, sometimes by choice, sometimes not. Police weren't called. No missing persons report was filed. Back then, women like Wilma were often ignored by the system. Days passed, then weeks, and Wilma's name faded from conversations, as if she had never existed at all. U.S. Highway 701 was a lonely stretch of road in the late 70s. It cut through farmland, swamps, and quiet towns. At night, it was pitch black. No lights, no traffic for miles. It was here, just outside the town of Mount Holly, that Wilma's story would end. Police believe she was picked up by someone that night. Maybe she knew him, maybe she didn't. What's certain is this: Wilma never made it out alive. We can't know for sure what happened in those final hours, but investigators believe the killer took her somewhere remote, a place no one would hear her scream. It's likely she was restrained, likely she fought back, but she was outmatched. The killer struck her multiple times in the head. The force was brutal, enough to shatter bone, enough to ensure she would never get up again. She was left there, abandoned in an open field, the stars above her, the damp Carolina night pressing in. In 1978, forensics was primitive. There were no DNA databases, no security cameras on every corner. Whoever killed Wilma was smart or lucky. They left almost nothing behind. No vehicle tracks, no fingerprints, no witnesses. Police recovered her body the next day, but identifying her was impossible at the time. She carried no ID. Her clothing was generic, and she had no dental records on file. The only things they had were her face, her injuries, and her blood type. For decades, she was known only as Jane Doe, buried in a simple grave. No headstone, no flowers. Her case sat in a box in the sheriff's office. Dozens of photos, handwritten notes, evidence bags sealed and forgotten. Investigators worked leads when they could, but nothing stuck. By the mid-1980s, most assumed her killer was either dead or had moved on to new hunting grounds. Some believe Wilma's death was the work of a serial killer. The area saw several murders of women in the late 70s. All shared disturbing similarities. Women from the margins of society, last seen hitchhiking or working truck stops, found beaten or strangled, bodies dumped in rural areas. But there was never enough evidence to link the cases. And so Wilma's murder became just another unsolved file. By the 1990s, most of the original investigators had retired. The small-town police force had moved on to new cases. Wilma's remains sat in an unmarked grave, her identity still a mystery. Her killer? Still nameless, still free. No one came forward. No one confessed. The silence was suffocating. What no one knew was that science was about to give Wilma her name back. It would take nearly 40 years. It would take new technology. And it would take a cold case detective who refused to let her go forgotten. But when the truth came out, it would only raise more questions. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. The Hunter had a method. Cold, deliberate method. Anchorage in the late 1970s was a growing city. Oil money had brought people from all over. Jobs were plentiful, but so were the shadows. In the city's dimly lit streets, danger lurked in plain sight. Bars and nightclubs were booming. Women, many young, many new to Alaska, worked in the clubs and on the streets. They were far from home, far from family, and to predators they were invisible. One of those predators was Robert Hansen. By day, Hansen was a quiet baker. He owned a small bakery in Anchorage. He smiled at customers. He offered donuts to kids. He paid his taxes. He was polite to police officers. But behind the smile, something darker hid. Hansen had been in trouble before. Decades earlier, he'd been arrested for theft. He'd even served time for trying to kidnap a woman. But people forgot. People wanted to believe he'd changed. In truth, Hansen had only grown smarter, more patient, more calculating. Hansen's prey were women who worked in the sex trade. Dancers, escorts, runaways desperate for money. He'd offer them a deal, quick cash for a private photo shoot or an out-of-town date. Once they were in his car, there was no escape. Hansen would drive them to his home. There, his wife and kids were often away. The house was clean, ordinary, unremarkable, except for the basement. In that basement, Hansen kept a collection of hunting trophies. Animal heads mounted on the walls, guns neatly displayed, knives sharpened, and in that basement he would chain his victims. Hansen didn't kill right away. He liked to play first. He would take the woman by plane, his own small bush plane, and fly them deep into the Alaskan wilderness. Miles from anyone, miles from safety, The women would realize too late what was happening. They were not going on a date. They were prey. Hansen would give them a head start, sometimes hours, sometimes only minutes, and then he would hunt them with a rifle through the trees, in the cold, until they could run no more. Detectives believe this is what happened to Eklutna Annie. She likely met Hansen in Anchorage. Maybe she needed money. Maybe she trusted his offer. He looked harmless enough, short, quiet, almost shy. But once she stepped into his world, the trap closed. They think he flew her near Eklutna Lake. Remote, dense with trees, silent except for the wind through the branches. She ran. She must have run. But Hansen knew the land. He was an expert hunter. In his mind, this was sport. The fight ended with a blade. Detectives believe Hansen stabbed her in the back. Fast, efficient, like field dressing a kill. Hansen buried her in a shallow grave. He didn't care about covering her well. The dirt was thin. The cold would hide her longer than any soil. She lay there for months, her name already forgotten by the man who took her life. Hansen moved on to other prey. He hunted again and again. Over the years, the number of women who vanished grew. Police noticed, but at first, no one connected the disappearances. These were women who lived risky lives, they thought. Some may have left town. Some may have overdosed. Some may have been killed by pimps or johns. That thinking gave Hansen time. Years of time. It wasn't until 1983 that Anchorage police began to see a chilling pattern. Several women had been reported missing. Many were last seen with a man who matched Hansen's description. But he seemed so harmless, and there was no hard evidence. Then came the break. A woman escaped. Her name was Cindy Paulson. She was 17. She worked the streets. In June 1983, she agreed to meet a client. The man was polite. He offered her $200 for a quick encounter. She got in his car. Moments later, a gun was pointed at her. He took her to his home. He chained her in the basement. But Cindy was smart. She listened. She waited. When Hansen left her briefly alone, she worked the chains loose. She ran barefoot into the street. A passing driver picked her up and took her to safety. This time, police listened. Cindy told them about Hansen. She described his home. She described the basement. She described the small bush plane. It was too specific to be made up. Detectives began digging into Hansen's past. Old charges for kidnapping and assault resurfaced. Rumors from women on the street matched Cindy's story. The polite baker didn't seem so harmless anymore. In Hansen's eventual confession, he admitted to a girl near Eklutna Lake. He didn't know her name. He didn't care to know. But his words matched the grave detectives had found in 1980. Eklutna Annie was his first known victim, but not his last. As detectives pressed Hansen, the list of victims grew. He pointed out grave sites on a map. 17 in total, each marked with an X. Each a place where a woman had been hunted, killed, and buried. Eklutna Annie was just the beginning. The case had a face now, but not a name for the killer. Investigators had waited decades to identify the woman found in that lonely South Carolina ditch. When DNA finally confirmed she was Wilma Nissen, it felt like the first sunrise after a long night. But the darkness was far from gone. Now they knew who she was, but they didn't know who wanted her dead. Wilma's life, once invisible to the public, was suddenly under a microscope. Every decision, every relationship, every shadow. Detectives began to pull records, phone logs, letters, witness statements most decades old. And the picture that emerged was unsettling. Wilma had been moving, constantly, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, sometimes vanishing for weeks. She lived in cheap motels, rented rooms, and couch-surfed with acquaintances. Why? Was she running from someone? Or to something? One witness, an old roommate, remembered seeing her in the fall of 1978. She seemed nervous, the woman told police, always looking over her shoulder. Another remembered a man, tall, dark hair, a voice that could cut glass. They argued a lot, he said. But I couldn't tell if it was about money or something worse. Detectives searched arrest records. They searched old mugshots. But the man's name stayed out of reach, just like everything else about Wilma's killer. The evidence from 1978 was still there, yellowed, fragile, but intact. Inside were photographs of the scene, tattered dress, pair of shoes with worn soles, fibers, and something odd, a small plastic charm shaped like a heart. It wasn't valuable, but it was personal. Was it hers? Or was it from the killer? Back then, rural South Carolina was tight-knit. Outsiders stood out. When the body was first found, rumors flew. Some whispered it was the work of a truck driver. Others claimed it was tied to a biker gang. One man, now in his 70s, still remembers the day the police came to his farm. "They showed me a picture of her face," he said quietly. "Asked if I'd seen her. I told them no, but I'd seen a car, parked off the road. That night, he didn't see the driver, didn't get a plate number, but he remembered something else. A loud argument, a woman's voice, and then silence. In 1979, police had suspects. A few men were questioned. One was a known violent offender. Another was rumored to have dated Wilma. Both were released. No evidence. No witness willing to stand in court. By the early 1980s, the case had gone cold. The name Jane Doe replaced Wilma's in every file, and the killer went free. Now, with Wilma's name back in the light, detectives returned to the beginning. They knocked on doors, tracked down anyone who knew her. Some were cooperative. Others refused to talk. It was as if the past was still dangerous, as if the killer might still be watching. The deeper they looked, the more they saw a pattern. Wilma wasn't the only woman to vanish in the late 1970s along the Carolina highways. Several others, some still unidentified, were found in rural areas. Some strangled, some stabbed. Could it have been the same man? A serial predator moving across states? The heart charm, the fibers, the dress. Every item was sent to the lab. Modern forensic tech could pull DNA from things the old methods never could. If the killer had touched her clothing, the skin cells might still be there. The first results came back empty. The second, too. Then, partial profile. Not enough for a direct match, but enough to compare against criminal databases. And somewhere in those files, the killer might be waiting. There was another lead. One from an unexpected source. A woman in her 60s came forward. She claimed she'd met Wilma in 1978. They talked for hours in a diner. Wilma told her she was afraid of a man, that she couldn't go to the police, that he had people everywhere. When asked for a name, the witness hesitated. "I think it was Danny, or maybe Donnie, something like that." Every day without an arrest means one thing: the killer could still be alive, still out there, maybe even walking past strangers in a grocery store. For the detectives, that's the fuel that keeps them going. They've solved older cases. They believe this one can be solved. But they need the right break. A name, a confession, or one more piece of evidence from that night in 1978. The name was back. The face was back. But the killer was still in the shadows. 40 years of silence. 40 years of no justice. For detectives, that's not closure. It's a wound that never heals. Started with a phone call. A retired officer in Georgia had been watching the news about Wilma's identification. He called investigators in South Carolina. "I think I might know who you're looking for," he said. The name he gave matched an old suspect from 1979. A man who had once been seen arguing with Wilma. A man who had left the state right after her murder. His name was changed now. He lived under a different identity. Detectives ran his fingerprints through the system. No matches. But they found something else. A criminal record from decades ago. Not for murder, but for assault. And it involved another woman. The similarities were chilling. Two detectives made the trip. They drove hundreds of miles to a small, weathered house in rural Alabama. A dog barked in the yard. When the man answered, he looked older, weaker, but there was still something cold in his eyes. They asked him about Wilma. He denied knowing her. When they mentioned 1978, he stiffened. "I don't remember," he said. "I was young. Things are blurry." But detectives knew. Some memories never fade. The man refused a DNA swab. That was his right, for now. But detectives had other tools. They began digging into his life, where he had worked, who he had known, where he had been on the night Wilma died. Bit by bit, they built a timeline. It placed him within 20 miles of the crime scene. But in court, suspicion is not enough. While the investigation pushed forward, Wilma's daughters spoke publicly for the first time. They had grown up without knowing the truth. Now, as adults, they wanted answers. "She was more than a case file," one said. "She was our mother, and someone took her from us." They held vigils, shared her photo online, begged anyone with information to speak up. And people listened. Old friends, former neighbors, even strangers began sending tips. Investigators made a bold decision. They turned to genetic genealogy, a method that had cracked dozens of cold cases. They uploaded the partial DNA profile from Wilma's clothing into a public database. They waited. Weeks passed. Nothing. Then, a hit. Not a direct match, but a distant cousin of the killer. Building a family tree from DNA is like solving a puzzle with missing pieces. Detectives, alongside genealogists, mapped out connections. Dozens of relatives, generations back. And slowly, one branch stood out. It led back to the man in Alabama. With this new evidence, investigators secured a warrant for his DNA. The sample was taken from a discarded coffee cup. Lab results came in days later. It was a match. 40 years later, they finally had the killer's genetic fingerprint. Early one morning, police cars rolled into the quiet neighborhood. Neighbors watched from porches as the man was led away in handcuffs. He didn't fight. He didn't cry. He just stared straight ahead. Charged with Wilma's murder, he faced a courtroom full of people who had waited decades for justice. The defense claimed the DNA was contaminated, that the evidence was too old. But the jury heard the timeline. They saw the pattern of violence in his past. They heard from witnesses who remembered his rage. The verdict came back in less than a day. Guilty. For Wilma's daughters, it was bittersweet. They had answers, but they had lost too much time. "I wish I could have one day with her," one said through tears. "To tell her I love her. To tell her I never stopped looking." Wilma's story became a rallying cry for other cold cases. Proved that no matter how much time passes, the truth can surface. Detectives who worked the case say they'll never forget it. Not because it was solved, but because it showed the power of persistence. The ditch where Wilma was found is quiet now. Grass grows where her body once lay. But the silence is different. It's not the silence of an unsolved mystery. It's the silence of a chapter closed. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.